Good luck.
Okay, Zoom.
We started?
We started.
All right, we are here at Ratnaling at the office of Dharma Publishing, and Julia Whitwer is willing to have a conversation about the book Reflections of Faith, a spiritual journey in modern society, intimated by Tartan Tulku Rinpoche's teachings. So Julia is also the editor of most of Rinpoche's recent writings and the editor of this book. So she knows me better than anyone. No, I cannot say that. But.
It was such a pleasure, actually, to edit this book. I really enjoyed it from start to finish. So I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me. So there's lots of ways that we can kind of make our way into this really interesting book. I think it's a really valuable, really relevant, really heartfelt book. Sometimes almost a little painful to read because of the honesty. But I think very, very rewarding reading. And there's lots of ways to think about this. There's the story, you could say, that runs through it, the life story. And there's these sort of themes that come up. You know, there's the theme of, I think, memory. There's the theme of destiny. There's the theme of spirit and faith. All of these things, we can sort of pull a little thread and take a little look. And maybe I think a place I'd like to start would be actually this question of when you talk in the book about desire, because this is a word that I think people have connotations for. And anybody who knows anything a little bit about Buddhism maybe wonders about this word in the context of a book like this, right? You have, I don't know if you would say I am a Buddhist, right? But you've, I think, you've committed your life to caring for the Dharma, supporting the Dharma, right? So that's a position. Are you comfortable with that, to say that?
No, I would never say that.
Ooh.
I say that I deeply appreciate that I would like to embody Rinpoche's teachings. Now, if you say that they are originating in Buddhism and they are expressing Buddhist views, I think that's all true. Even Rinpoche sometimes talks about beyond Buddhism. So it's not that I'm uncomfortable with the word, but for me, it's Rinpoche's teachings, and especially how Rinpoche has presented that in the West. You know, it is about making the most of your life, using your time well, and what are the kind of the basic requirements for that. So, but in the process, in addition to the theory, like, you know, make the most of your life, and your time counts. What I felt was really the teaching was to take responsibility in the backdrop of time. So Rinpoche would suggest something, and it was always felt like an invitation. So Rinpoche would suggest, oh, what do you think about this? Or would you like to become the dean of... No, I don't think, there's no sentence. Would you like to become the dean? It didn't go like that, but something like, I can't even copy, but it would be a short sentence about the dean of the institute, and it had to do with me. So then the moment that I say yes, there is nothing in between Rinpoche's invitation. And I think it's not the invitation that is so striking, but the openness in which Rinpoche is. It feels open. One way that I know it's open is because I come with 4 or 5 questions in my mind, and when I sit in front of Rinpoche, I can't even get to them. I cannot hold of them, as if a little fish is suddenly in a very big ocean. So it's a small-mindedness in a very big mind. So I forget my questions, which is sometimes a little problematic because I have to discuss them, and sometimes Rinpoche would answer them before I would ask them. So that all of that takes place. So I would like, when I saw Rinpoche, there was something about Rinpoche's presence, I wouldn't even say that his being, that I would like to become. So I just read this morning in the I Ching, I had a question, and I read a sentence of, when you are in the vicinity of a saintly behavior, that's not what we would say Rinpoche is, but that was the I Ching language, then adopt it. So I would like to adopt. Sometimes Rinpoche comes to Ratnaling and he sees all these stupas here. He says, are you trying to mimic me, right? And I say, yes, because he once said, mimic me. That's all you need to do. This is a very traditional Eastern way of teaching, is you mimic. And in the mimicking, you are already presenting your own individuality, because everybody who's doing that is different ways of mimicking. But so I'm instrumental in making stupas. Andy is making them, but I'm in between to make it happen. So I mimic, and there's a joy in it, but I don't know what force is really behind it. So I started to think at one point, what is really making it possible? How can I say it more precisely? We have accomplished big things, even from professional points of view, and possible things. And the whole community is, but I was in a few of those projects, and I was wondering what makes that happen. And the first instance say, well, because there's energy, Rinpoche's energy is there, the blessings are there, and that is the foundation. But because there's not a yes or no, there's another state of mind that is beyond yes or no. I'm in it, right. And I'm in it, and I am participating, and I like, and I'm doing, and I want to do. And there's no better way than to describe that by desire. So I would like to take 2 minutes, if you don't mind, to talk about that. And this is what was first in the book, but that was deleted because I had to cut 140 pages. But this was first in the book, where I described that on some high schools in Berkeley, they have 6 weeks world religion. And of those 6 weeks, that means 12 times, world religion, Buddhism is also discussed, and then discussed suffering. And then they think Buddhism is about suffering. Even the Pope, 2 popes back, wrote about that Buddhism is very negative because it's about suffering. And Rinpoche answered, he wrote a letter to this Pope. And when they talk about suffering, it's only to get rid of suffering so you can see what is really going on. You can see yourself. Who are you without suffering? It's a wonderful topic. Or what are you without suffering? So suffering is not a topic. It's like the clouds in front of the sun. And if you want to contact the sun, you have to go through the clouds. So this kind of unnecessary suffering, I'm not necessarily talking about physical suffering, but this kind of emotional suffering, if you go through it, you can see, if I look through my own limitations, if I look through my automatic reactions, I see something in myself, and it's not hard to see it in the other then too. You see goodness, you see value, you see creativity, you see love, you see warmth. But in between are the layers. So when you talk about suffering in the traditional Buddhist teaching, you want to end this unnecessary suffering. And then there is the beginning of Buddhism. It says that desire is one of the causes of suffering. Now I begin to shiver. Can you imagine there's an 18-year-old girl or young woman or young man, and they learn at school that Buddhism is about getting rid of desire. That is really just about the worst thing you can tell them.
How depressing.
How depressing. And what they mean, of course, is, but they don't say that, what they mean is that whatever comes to mind that tends to grasp you, that is actually grasping. And they sometimes equate grasping with desire. So when something comes to mind and you engage in it, that process is called grasping or desire. But that's not a desire that I'm familiar with. So they try to release the grasping, but they equate it with desire. But in later Buddhism, in the Vajrayana, and although I'm not a spokesperson for this at all, the Tantra, desire is the fuel for transformation. So anything good that comes about, and bad too, of course, is through desire. So I don't know how to describe desire other than life wants to live, something like that. So I'm embodying life. Well, life wants to live. What is that activity of living? In English, you would say the lust for life. It's especially a Dutch word. You say it a lot in English too, lust for life?
Yeah, a little bit. That one's, that particular phrasing is, I think, a little bit been overshadowed by our idea of lust as being primarily about sex.
Yeah.
Right. So it doesn't, it depends on the generations a little bit for that one.
Yeah, the lust for life is more like longing in an everyday sense. So longing is not in the long term, but longing, I want to live now what I'm longing for. That's the desire, the lust for life. So when I did these projects, or even now, I don't think of the benefits so much. I don't think of the merit. I don't think of the 3,200 Tibetan communities in exile. I don't think of all the Western people who could benefit from the book. I'm in the energy and I want to make it available. And I would say, well, I have benefited from that too. So I owe it to maybe some other people who need to find out about it too. But that's all talk. You know, if I'm in it, I have abundant energy. I'm not tired. I can work from 6 in the morning till 10 at night. And it's not even work. It is being engaged in. So the traditional Buddhists would say we're living in the realm of desire. And everything that is suggested to consider, the desire for enlightenment, the desire for good communication, the desire for friendly intimacy, the desire to work what's important, what's value, is all desire. So I didn't know a better way to describe it. So I'm a proponent, but it is not like just, it's the desire that transforms all these limiting patterns. So, you know, there's a quote, somebody who has done a lot of research about it, but like he makes this up of, we're considered of rage and longing and anger and escape and fight. When you all put that together in like one bundle of emotionality, it is desire that can transform that.
I have a hard time maybe putting this in words, but as I hear you talk, something that comes to my mind, that comes back to these high school kids and this sort of picture of Buddhism, is that sometimes the negativity is not just, oh, we're stuck in suffering, but that the actions are negative. The idea that we have about Buddhism is you're supposed to relinquish this or abandon that or refuse this, right? So there's a sort of whatever it is, not that, and that's Buddhism, right?
Right.
Whereas what you're describing, it seems to me, is something very positive. It's very it's sort of reaching. It's not rejecting, but embracing.
Yeah.
And there's a sense to me as I listen to you and I think back on all the projects that we've been involved with as our community. You mentioned at the very beginning of this, we're saying it's almost unthinkable what's been done. And how could it be done unless there was this kind of almost voracious, embracing, enthusiastic, like, let's go for it, right? Mm-hmm. And that's a very different energy than this notion that what we have to do is refrain, right? Not participate.
Yeah, I'm very uncomfortable. Not that, not this, not that, not that. There's a certain kind of meditation that some people practice. That's not my style. My style is yes, yes. Mm-hmm. It's not even opposite to no. It is beyond yes or no. It is yes, yes, yes. And these teachings that I'm talking about, they are teachings on energy. So my body-mind energy gets in touch with a larger field, which we call mandala of energy, which actually is harnessing more cosmic energy, if you will, vitality. Not just us, but everybody who does that is a specimen of cosmic vitality. So, but if I'm getting not limited to myself, not just thinking about myself, but I'm participating in something larger than the energy that I'm participating in me, they start to join. Now, if you add to that the energy of time, now you have some potion to work with. So the energy of time is very, very strong. And in my case, I've come to love time. I've come to love deadlines, meaningful deadlines, because there is so much in a deadline that the energy and the knowledge that you can bring into here.
Let's talk a little more about that, because that's very interesting to me. I think a lot of people have this feeling of time as a terrible limit. Time is often painful, right? Either it's too long or it's too short, right? We're either kind of stuck in this boredom, right? The long, dark tea time of the soul kind of feeling, right? We can't get a handle, or we just feel that the time is a total limit on whatever it is we're trying to do. We just don't have enough time, right? I think of my mother, who was cut off in her life so young, and the books that she did not get to write. And one thinks of time as being this, kind of a hatchet almost. But what you're describing is that there's something else to time. There's some other way to be in time that's more, that actually brings creativity out, that brings beautiful things to life.
Yeah, I don't want to secretly promote, but in the first book I wrote was called Masterwork. There's extensively about the difference between being in time and out of time. And so you can very simply say that the difficulties that arise are because we are not in time. If you want to be a little bit more sentimental, it is like you're not in your rhythm. So in order to be successful, you need to be in your rhythm, and that rhythm needs to fit in with a deadline or with the end of time. So no, the time for me is it is the key to intimacy. It's the key to energy. It's the key to information. The practice that I've done very often was to imagine myself growing old, and I make it a little bit dramatic. I'm in a hospital and I'm lying down, and then I do two things. I look back to this moment and I'm trying to tell myself, now that I'm dying, what would I recommend myself? What should I not forget in the limited time that is left? And of course, love. To love and be loved. That is a very special experience. But to love is love life. And not only one person or only your children. Love life, and that I get that by being connected to time. If I'm not connected to time, I cannot make the link with love. I can make a link with gratefulness and appreciation, but not with love for life. That is connected to time.
I feel like when I hear you describe these exercises that you do, my sense is you must do them rather often.
This one I do a lot. And
yeah.
I didn't tell you the other part. I also go beyond death.
Oh.
So I love to experience this going back and it is all in my imagination, of course. But to make that transition, and what happens is when you go beyond, you come into the formless realm like this. So, and I do the same with before birth, before being in the womb and going back. And what I think that I'm experiencing is I'm experiencing time without form. So there's time before I was born or conceived, and there's time after I die. So now in between, I have to give that form and shape, and the time is getting less and less and less. But as I'm aware of the time after and the time before, each second, each minute gets bigger and bigger because I'm in those times too, and this is just an in-between.
I think that what I'm hearing here is that because you have this relationship to time and this way of working with time, right? You have a very active, friendly, engaged, like time is your partner.
Mm-hmm.
And that makes me think about something that struck me very much as I was editing this book was the extraordinary memory that you seem to possess. You have remarkable recall, and it really comes through so naturally as you sort of take us into the events of your life in this book. You take us way in and remember incredible, vivid, tactile details about places you lived, people you knew. It's one of the most engaging things for a reader to follow that thread. It's very reminiscent of the Maitland, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of that wonderful book by Proust,
mm-hmm.
that extended cycle of novels. And memory is an interesting thing because memory is also in so many ways connected to suffering, mm-hmm. right? And yet here it seems to be almost a redemptive power. Right? Instead of locking us into our pattern, right? Because we can't have a pattern unless we have memory, right?
Mm-hmm.
Here, memory seems to have a different job.
Well, but I must confess right off the bat that memory of my own mistakes and faults, I don't have very well. So I don't know what that is about me, but I don't really in detail remember the mistakes that I made. And of course, some people would love if I'm a little bit more attentive to that. But I remember the joyful things very well and the meaningful things very well. So, I cannot really dwell very long on a problem that we had 5 years ago. I can on some of them, and then I can remember details. But in that case, if I remember one in the past and I remember details, it's because I would have loved so much to have a good encounter instead of one that became emotional. So the desire to have good collaboration or good intimacy, is very important to me. I'm not a guy who's just working always by myself. There are always teams, there are always groups. And yeah, that is a very lively thing. And I'm not so good in memory, the other one. But what I like very, very much, and I showed that a few times in the book. The first time I showed it was in Hong Kong, and I cut a few, is that when I came to Hong Kong, I was, I don't know, 30 years old. And I didn't have a scheme of how to write. So I would say, well, now's the time for my time in Hong Kong. And so after New York, which is, I mean, can you imagine for a guy in the 20s or a woman in the 20s to first be in New York and then Hong Kong? Yeah. And I didn't choose them. I didn't even know we had offices there, but there was a guardian angel in Rotterdam who had the best in mind for the company and for me. So he placed me in New York first and then in Hong Kong, instead of in Rhodesia, as it was called then, or New Zealand, which sounds lovely now, but not for a 25-year-old guy who wants to be in the middle of the world. So I landed in Hong Kong and I didn't remember anything. So I said, I stopped. So I stopped time. And then I dove into time to whatever the year was. And then some of the things that I didn't remember started to come to the surface. Can you follow how I speak or not?
Oh, yeah.
So then it comes to the surface. Where is that? It is in the body, but it's also in time. But now it gets a little funny, because if I can do that with myself, I can do it with you too, or you can do it with me too. So what I did is, the first time I did it with myself in Hong Kong, and I stayed, I froze the moment. I entered the hotel, and then the hotel started to come to life. So I didn't go to after the next thing in my life or the office or whatever. And I didn't go back to where I came from. I just froze. It was just like the movie stops. And then these things start to come up. So I saw the woman and the name of the hotel, and she had a roller decks, and I smelled the carpet and all of that. And then it turned out to be a little later that my godfather, my uncle, the brother of my mother, had more or less the same position that I had in 1938. So now I thought, I'm going to do the same. Now, I'm not claiming at all that that is the absolute truth, but it is through my senses and through my perspective, my lens, that I could sense what it was like to be my uncle in that time. And I just wrote, well, it seemed like he had a good time, but that's after 5 paragraphs that I deleted. But you have the same, you can have the same, like if you would think about, we won't do it now, but if I would say, can you go back to some friends of your mother when she was young? You say, well, no, I don't remember any. Oh, wait a minute, freeze the moment of your mother being 17. So you have an image, it doesn't have to be the right one. You see your mother at 17. And then suddenly in that image, it starts to come to life and you see some of her friends. It's not the absolute truth, but there's something about it that makes the experience richer and you feel joy because you're interacting with that time.
That is a very powerful practice. I have a feeling that that's something that's not only good for writers, right, but just for the way that we deal with our past. And, you were saying that you have this kind of drive to make positive connections. And I feel like, in a way, this is a way to make friends with one's past, right? Because each of these moments is a moment you get to engage with more wholeheartedly. For people who have maybe painful pasts, where remembering is, you kind of bounce off the memory because it's so painful. It's very difficult to engage. This feels like it could provide some healing, because you're saying, it's not that you have to go relive some painful event, but let's slow it down a little bit.
Very good, yeah. So if you slow down, the pain that you feel is actually the rigidity of the moment. So that's why it is painful, because it has hardened. What was flowing and open has become hardened. So if you stay with it and you don't elaborate on it, you begin to have a feeling relationship with it. Now the feelings that are there may have been scared and all of that, but those are more mental interpretations, but you begin to feel what is inside this hardened quality. So I'm a firm believer that some of the traumas, I don't know the very big ones, but the traumas can be lessened if we pay attention to the sensations that we felt then, and actually just before they happened. But I want to give you an example, if you don't mind, about memory. This is for a good example, and I have maybe 25, 30 of them, including my favorite one. And that is that I read, when I just studied Buddhism, that when the Buddha died, nobody had taken notes. So we thought, oh, what now? So then his cousin, Ananda, years later, he perfectly recalled all the sermons. And we say nowadays lectures, but they were sermons. And he described the 5 conditions, where it was, who was present, what the circumstances were, what's samadhi, what level of meditation the Buddha is, and who was asking the questions. And then from perfect memory, he recalled everything. And if you read it for the first time, you say, no, that's not right. But one of the things that the Buddha himself said in the voice of the Buddha, that he had perfect recall. And that is because everything is accessible. Now it gets a little bit weird, because if that is true, and I've never tried this, that you can also become familiar with something that you have no notion about. You know, if you read a book about a famous, like Padmasambhava, you know, he spoke 450 languages when he was 12 years old. How did he do that? Well, I think theoretically because he tuned into that language and then becomes it. So now that is, I have not considered that possibility, but what I have considered is you can tune into the Buddha, you can tune into, in my case, Rinpoche's lineage, like Longchenpa in the 12th, 13th century. And this is what I definitely will do when I have more time, is to be there and stop and then invite that situation and then let the two interact with each other as if I'm in that time. Now, it is not exactly what happened, but there's something about that that awakens the lust, oh, I won't use that anymore, that awakens the enthusiasm for life, the enthusiasm for being, for loving. The result of doing that is love. It is not like, can you do this or not? But to go into time, into space, and to let it come to life.
Sort of embrace it and give it your care, and then
Yeah.
let it nourish you in return. So there's an exchange that's almost, doesn't even have 2 parts anymore. Right? It's
Yeah.
a union.
Yeah.
Oh, it's very beautiful. I feel like that might be a nice...
But it's a little bit uneven. I'm the one who's talking all the time, but you have all these similar experiences too. But maybe we do that the next time.
Well, I was just thinking, I don't want to take up this is important time. You have a lot to share here. But this lines up with a few of my experiences, certainly working with Rinpoche. You know, a few years ago, I compiled an essay for the Dapter, which is a volume that we send every year to to India, for the Monlam Chenmo. Which had an extended essay that included discussion of his teachers. And my goal had been, let's please differentiate each one of these incredible masters. People see their photos, we don't know anything about them. And I fell into this wonderful, I just felt like I fell through the world, and I started working with each of the teachers and some of the things that Rinpoche said. And in retrospect, it's like, well, girl, you weren't there. You know, what right do you have to do these kinds of notes? But I feel that my wish was to try to be present for his lineage and listen to what I heard. And that was, I did the best I could. But so what you're saying is very reminiscent to me. I mean, it's very familiar and it's very, but articulated in a way where it helps me see even a therapeutic dimension that hadn't really occurred to me. As sort of work survival mode, you know, you have to slow down time in order to just get your deadlines, right? So stop time. I kind of, oh yeah, I know about that one. But from the standpoint of healing, I think that's really important to bring that in dimension.
Yeah, can I say something about his teachers too?
Sure.
So there's some literature about Rinpoche and his teachers, and sometimes it's 7 or sometimes it's 17. There are more and more important ones. And actually, I went to Tibet to visit the places where he met these teachers. And Rinpoche said before I went, he made the schedule where to go. And before he went, he said, well, there's nothing the same except the mountains. So when I went to his monastery, where he grew up in Tartang Monastery, I only saw the rock, that everything has a spirit there, a aliveness to it, which we call spirit. So there's a rock that has water coming out of it, and that they put mantras on it and they revere that rock, and there are spirits that protect the area. There's not spirits, but that's our Western way of speaking. So I went and I read all these teachers, and during the trip and after, before, I gave lectures on them, and 3 of them, that's just an in-between, 3 of them said to Rinpoche upon leaving them, he said, remember, you have a purpose. And that is one of these teachings that I like very much. You have a purpose. So I don't have a specific purpose, or I don't think people have a specific purpose, but the idea that my life has a purpose has a wave to it, and I can ride that wave, and it just feels rich and secure. So I did this too. I've worked with Rinpoche's teachers. We have big pictures of them, and you see these wise people. So I practiced with them in the sense of, like I was talking about, I would sit with them and have an energetic exchange. You do it simple. We have this ceremony in Lançamento where we chant 16 hours a day. So then they're hanging there. So you invite them to come to you, as if you reverse the subject object. Instead of me looking at them, you see them looking at you. So I did that regularly, and I once mentioned to Rinpoche, and this is so typical for his teachings, Rinpoche always, as far as I can tell, will lead you to the next step. And he says, oh no, you need to go beyond that. So I was so glad that I had found a practice, a cozy one. I could call these teachers to mind and have conversations in my mind. And he kind of brushed it off the table, because now it's time for next, and there's nothing there yet. So, and then of course he always points to Padmasambhava as the embodiment for a complete human being. So we work with Padmasambhava for many reasons, and many of them I don't know, but one of them is to awaken the potential of complete human being in us, and the male, the masculine, the feminine, and the eye of the wisdom and the application of the wisdom. All these qualities in one wakes up by just working with that image. So my point was to Rinpoche's teaching, I don't know if that ever fits into Buddhism, but that's the advantage of working with a teacher, that I discovered something that I was so happy about. So that's great, but in other words, it will keep you in and maybe a larger circle, but it still keeps you in a circle.
Yeah, the teacher will move us, if we're willing to commit, right? And of course, I think it really requires a certain trust, a certain faith, to put ourselves in the position to allow ourselves to be taught, to allow ourselves to accept a little bit that, for me, I'm an endless talker. And so when Rinpoche says something to me like, oh, what I'd like you to do is learn how to not talk, take all these, things you like to, you're so profuse, just get one sentence. And I'm like, it's terrifying kind of teaching. But because I trust him, I endeavor to try to do as he asks, because I find that I have a track record a little bit with him. And also there's something my instinct tells me that this, uncomfortable as it may be, this maybe is a direction. I think that might be an interesting place to take us if we're asking about faith. Is it okay to sort of move into this topic? Or?
It's very okay. We had a few interviews now, and I'm very happy that the word never was mentioned. And the reason for that is that I'm a little bit afraid, if I talk about faith, that I'm trying to answer people's skeptical ideas about faith. And I don't want to go there. So in Spanish, I happen to know they've tried to find a word for faith, and you call it reflexiones, right? No, reflections.
Reflejos.
Reflejos. So it is like when you have a picture of water, you see in the water the trees or the buildings. And reflection of faith. So it is not a reflection, I'm saying a second thing now, it's not reflections from let's consider. Like, much to my dismay, I discovered that there is a book called Reflections of Faith, but it's, I don't know, 30, 40 years old or something like that. And that is more like, well, let me start reflecting about faith, what it all means. That's not it. It is like a reflection in water. So the title of the book, so I if I go straight to the point, is that I was in Tibet and I was in a cave of Paltru Rinpoche. He's a 19th century Nyingma Lama, a master, and he's very well known. He wrote a book that is studied by all people who are interested in Tibetan teachings, Words for My Perfect Teacher. It's in English. And it was a little hut there, and it was strange. The monks down in the valley, they didn't even know. I said, well, Paltro Rinpoche, maybe because of my pronunciation. That's probably the case. But we finally found it. And there was a cave, and there was a person, a monk, a lama. There's different kind of lamas. There's a lama monk was there, and he was guarding the space. And he was so generous or gallant to get out and let us in. We were the three of us, but the other two said, okay, I've seen this cave. There are more caves up the hill. And this is, in this case, it was good. I have this problem in general. If I'm going to stay in a hotel, I go into the first hotel, and that's fine. But it would be maybe better to look around a little bit. Or if I go to a restaurant, I'm sitting down in the first one. Well, shall we look around, see if there are more ones? So, but in this case, it helped me. I didn't want to go to any other cave, and I sat down. He closed the door. So what I did is what I did in that year. I told my story as genuine as I could. I don't know exactly what that was at this moment, but it was some like exposing myself in a way that with my uncertainties and my wishes, and there was a lively exchange that started, because that cave is not empty. Yeah. That cave is full of energy. You can call it Paltro Rinpoche, and that's what it is, whatever that is. So it is different if you're in an energy of somebody who is really accomplished, or the traditional word is awakened. Alive would be another term. So by interacting with this, my energy started to, go into that state of more elevated communication, I guess. So I was very happy afterwards. More not like haha happy, but like deeply happy. So this is almost like, well, this is what I have lived for until now. It's a little dramatic, but like that. So when I came back, Rinpoche did two things. One is, he said, this is just a little sidestep. He said, did you see Paltro Rinpoche's Mani wall? Apparently there's a very long wall, Paltro Rinpoche, very long wall. He said, did you see that? I said, no, I didn't. He said, did you go to Zhongsar Monastery? No, I didn't. He didn't ask any of the other 13 that I went to, but he asked the two that I didn't go to. So, and I didn't go to because there were road repairs that were very serious. So, and then I told Rinpoche about this, and I started to tell what happened. And he says, that's Reflections of Faith. And I said, that's the title of my book, if it ever comes off it. Reflections of Faith. It reflected what I stand for. And what I stand for, it's not like I can say, I have faith. I would never say that. I would never say, I believe. But what I stand for, maybe it's a matter of words, but I really value, maybe that's another word, I valued this kind of interaction, this kind of, to spend my time with this kind of mind, with this kind of heart, with this kind of life, with this kind of devotion and dedication. That's what I want to be around, without worrying if I ever become like that. I'm just enjoying deeply to be in that atmosphere. So that is my life's calling at this moment, not how I pass it on to others. That's another part of the calling, but to be in that atmosphere. And Rinpoche said, that reflects faith. That is what you stand for. So what you are standing for in life, that would be a reflection of faith that we can sense. So you're living your life, you're working where you are, is that I can sense what you stand for, because that is what you have faith in. You have faith in what your mission is.
And if I look into my life as if it were a mirror,
yeah,
I can see a little bit more clearly if I understand.
If you don't think, yes.
Right. I mean, it's not something to reflect on.
Right.
Yeah. It's something
very
to
nice.
Engage with, right?
Yeah.
As the value of a mirror.
But then I had to substantiate this, because who's going to listen to this eventually? And I said, well, the traditional teachings is you have faith in what is real, which is the law of karma. Like what I do matters, that's real. What I do matters, and that's karma. I have faith in what is valuable, and that is to wake up, to get the most out of life, and what is possible. The first is the Four Noble Truths, and then the third one is the Three Jewels. It's the possibility of embodying the teachings that Buddha has manifested, which is inner awakening. I believe in, I have faith in that. So my life is to live by these three principles, and traditionally they call that faith.
I feel like that's a valuable way for us to think about faith, or to reflect on faith. When Rinpoche, for example, right now I'm trying to finish a book, and he gave me beautiful notes for an introduction. And one of the things that he talked about was the fundamental importance of faith. Something he said that, you know, the upholders of lineage in Tibet and in the diaspora community in India, they have an understanding of this. Westerners, a little bit less so, for lots and lots of reasons. And so when he talks about the absolute fundamental importance of faith, I think it might be that even some of his students might be a little flummoxed. You know, it's like, I guess, you know, but what does this mean, really? And so when you share about faith from the inside out, right? It's not something that you have to profess,
Right.
or some belief you must take on and obey, but rather something that comes from within and is manifested in your life in an easy, obvious, maybe not easy, but obvious way, right? You can look and see. The proof is in the pudding.
Right.
Right. Maybe for people that's a little bit more understandable. Right.
Yeah. And if somebody would say to me, "Oh, you have a lot of faith," I what is the word? Shiver, shrink. I feel very uncomfortable with that. So, but at one point, and this is since it's just us talking, Rinpoche said once to me, "Well, you have a lot of faith, but that doesn't mean any spiritual development yet." So that became intriguing, you know. Yes, you have a lot of faith, but that doesn't indicate that you have spiritually developed. So then I went to look for what means spiritual developed.
Indeed.
And it's always connected to time and space in my readings. So as soon as I orient myself in time and in space, spirituality becomes a spiritual endeavor. Not until then.
I need you to say more about that, because I mean, that has a kind of gorgeousness to it, you know, like.
Oh, let's leave it at that.
But because spirituality is an interesting one, right? I think everybody sort of feels it, but I don't know how easy it is to, you know, to approach it in a way, right?
Well, it depends a little bit on the public, on the audience. When I talk to younger people, and that happens usually in Argentina, younger people, I talk about a purpose in life, and there I say one of Rinpoche's statements, where Rinpoche said, "As soon as you want to make the most out of your life, spirituality has begun." So that's kind of something that everybody can work with. If you want to make the most out of life, you are on a spiritual path. So getting the most out of life, that for certain has to do with time.
Sure.
So that's number one.
Right.
And the spirituality of time is that you can see or learn to see I don't know how to say it correctly. Maybe you can edit this in 5 years from now. To see the eternal in the temporal.
Wow.
So I'm interested in eternity, not because I want to become eternity, but what doesn't change. And the traditional Buddhist teachings, they don't like the word permanent. They say everything is impermanent. It's not true at all. There's something that are not impermanent. And what are those? And they say, well, there's 3 things that are not subject to conditions, like space. Okay, but they have a very beautiful one. To make things more beautiful, that's permanent. That can always happen. To make things better, to make things lighter, those things are permanent. So permanent is not only space and time or body and mind. And that's another one, which is a tricky one. They say when the whole world is destroyed, what remains is body and mind. That is indestructible in us. So holy smoke, if that's true, if that is true, that what is indestructible in me is body and mind. What is body and what is mind? Now you're really into spirituality. What is body? What is mind? And they have space connections. As soon as you talk about body, you talk about space. As soon as you talk about mind, you will have to talk about space too. And their interaction, of course, has to do with time. So I don't know this, but when I was writing the chapter on entering the mandala, I was in 2000. I lived at Odeon for a while, and the first thing is you're moving into a three-dimensional mandala. Now, if people who don't know what mandala is, this is not true at all what I'm saying now. But if you really have no idea, then let's say church. It's not the same, but for an idea, you're going to live in a church, which is not. But if you live in a church, I mean, what is in it? I'm only using this as an example. When you live in a church, what is happening to you? You know, maybe the stillness or the magnitude of it. But the church is also a symbol of infinite time and infinite space, and the eternal and the temporal together. You're not only interested in the eternal. I'm interested in the eternal in the temporal. So as soon as they come together, how you see the cross, which is maybe the temporal is the horizontal line and the eternal is the vertical line, and you want to be in the middle where you can say there's no time or every second is eternity. So this openness of time, you know, that's in the church. So when I was moving into the mandala and you read a little bit about the mandala, in the second sentence or the second paragraph, it talks already about time and space dimensions. That's what the mandala is. So it's new for me too, and it's not. Rinpoche wrote 5 or 6 books about time and space.
Oh, indeed. Time, space, and knowledge.
And knowledge. So they are very, very big. And but for now, for me, at this moment, I can say that time has something to do with the eternity and the temporal, and space has something to do with space that has no borders and no distance. That begins to change. So if you experience a space without borders and no distance, well, then we are beginning on the spiritual path.
My word. I think that the beauty of